In Kargil war, there were citations, which were gallantry award citations that were written by the Indian army on Pakistani officers.
Like testimonials.
Yeah, no, we said that इसको मिलना चाहिए, तुम्हारा जो भी होता है तुम निशान हैदर देते हो, जैसे हमारा परमवीर चक्र है, महावीर चक्र है, इसको देना चाहिए तुम लोगों को. What he has done is creditable, and I am saying it as the enemy, that this guy fought well. He did his job as a soldier, and as a soldier to soldier, you respect that.
Captain Ragu Raman, it's an honor having you on the Ranveer show, sir.
Great being here too, Ranveer.
So I know we are going to record numerous podcasts in the future, but today is the episode where I want to introduce you to my audiences. We have a common friend, Manish Pandey. He's been on the podcast himself.
Oh, has he?
Yeah.
I don't know. Okay.
Fantastic episode. One of our most loved episodes.
Really?
So this one is just about your story. Now here's quoting Manish Pandey. He said that Raghu sir is one of the most unique men because he's had one of the most unique careers amongst people from all over the world. And long story short, you've gone from being in the army, serving in the army. You've served in
Angola.
And you've transitioned to working with the government. Then you've transitioned into a corporate career. You worked with Reliance. And now you're kind of, I would like to call you
Unemployed.
a freelance motivation spreader, a leadership coach. Firstly, I want to know about your story right from college. And then as you go forward with the story, I'm going to stop you where I want to know some more things about you.
Thanks, Satan. So firstly, of course, Manish is extraordinarily kind with his words. You are aware of that with everybody.
He also called you one of the smartest and most accomplished people he's worked with.
Oh,
and that's huge coming from him as well.
Well, he must have been drinking something, smoking something these days. That's the fashion. Anyway, so it's not a very extraordinary story in the sense that it's not something that I planned out or something. Life just happened. I grew up in Delhi. And though my parents are from south of India, I was born and brought up in Delhi. And matter of fact, my name is Ragu Raman. I still but being in Delhi, my accent and people used to mistake me for a Jat. And so when I joined my battalion, that Ragu Raman became Raman, and it will remain Raman ever since. I guess in the army you get re-christianed, and that's what happened to me. So I was in Delhi. I was in college. I studied my degree in Delhi University in South Campus. And I had actually no intentions of joining the army. There's nobody in my family, up, down, left, right. So it was more of a certain set of instances which happened. I don't think many of your listeners would be old enough to remember 1984 when the riots happened in Delhi. And that kind of shook me completely when I saw the, carnage that happened the first time, I think.
What did you see?
Well, the Delhi Sikh riots were pretty bad. And I was actually, those days, living in a place called Mayur Vihar, which was next to another area called Trilokpuri. And Trilokpuri was the worst hit during, at least in Delhi. So much so that it was mentioned by name in BBC those days, that this was an area where... And then after that 3 days of mayhem or whatever, I suddenly saw the army come. And the moment army came, it was like, the storm ending and everything. And everyone became like... And for a 19, 20-year-old boy, that was like, wow, this is the organization I want to join. And I joined the army. And of course, when I joined, it was a very different place.
Which year was this?
This was in 1986. So 1984 end is what this happens. 1985 is the process of applying. And 1986 is when I joined the academy. So, and then about 18 months training in the academy. And after that, in 1987...
I got to stop you there.
Sure.
The training in the academy.
I'll come back to that.
How intense is it?
Of course, it is intense. I mean, it's intense. You're training a bunch of leaders who will have to take troops into active combat. It's not the art of living. It's the art of killing. So it has to be extremely intense. You will be... The whole training of any armed forces leaders at any level is basically to train them to operate under conditions of high stress, and stress where you're likely to lose your life. I mean, there can't be anything more stressful than that, right? Not losing your job, not losing your loved one, losing your own life. So the training has to be intense to that extent. And there are certain principles of that training pedagogy which we probably didn't understand at that point of time. But looking back some years later, and it's ironical that, not ironical, but very normal that I, towards the end of my career, was an instructor back in one of the academies where I was a student. And now when I saw it through the eyes of the instructor as a pedagogy, I understood what was the rationale of each one of those elements of training. Like, I'll give you an example. There's a great life lesson there also. Life lesson on looking at training and life lesson on storytelling, by the way. So in the academy, every day you have physical training, 1 hour, one hour, maybe more than 1 hour, and you have drill. Drill is, you've seen drill, march past and all of that stuff. So this drill, you are like drilled again and again, and every punishment is a form of a drill. So when you're punished, it is again drill. You have to do that. And at that time, we used to wonder, why the hell are we wasting so much of time? Of course, it improves your military bearing and all of that stuff, and the way you stand and the way you are. You can spot a army guy usually just by looking at them. And that's okay, but why would you waste 1 hour for 18 months every day? Now, interestingly, if you look at it, the rationale behind that is you are creating a body of troops who will work synchronized under one command. Now, the synchronization goes to such a level that when this body of troops is spread over the parade ground is pretty wide. You have about 500 officers lined up in the parade ground. And now when the guard commander shouts, Daine Mud, right turn, when he shouts Daine Mud, the person who's standing on the extreme right, he has to turn slightly slower because the time it takes for the sound to reach the last person, he has to compensate for it. So if he didn't do that, when you will see them turning right, you will see a wave, like that, a wave. But you don't see that. Whenever you see a drill happening, especially in academies like the Indian Military Academy or the NDA, where there is, after all, there are officers being trained for the highest level, or Officers Training Academy, you will find they move in one mass like that. And that's when our drill instructors would tell us that in 18 months' time, we will forge you into a unit that moves at the speed of sound. Now, that's when you understand the intensity of the pedagogy, why they're doing it. They're doing it because they want to forge a unit which has got the margin of error of the speed of sound, right? So, of course, very tough training.
But on what basis are people rejected from entry into the training process itself? Like, there is an entrance exam.
Oh, yes, there is.
On what basis are people...
So, actually, there's a 3-stage process. It's not just one stage. The first stage is a common entrance exam, which is you can apply through NDA, which is after your schooling, or you can apply after graduation. That's called direct entry. And then there are other entries like the engineers who have already done their engineering. They can go in as technical entries, and there are doctors and all that. They have various different processes. The first stage is a common entrance test, which you have to appear. It's an objective type exam. I believe it's much tougher now than it used to be when we were...
But you're grilled on what?
So the common aptitude, or rather the aptitude test, it's just objective test. It's testing you for basic stuff like mathematics, understanding this, that, like any other. It's actually a filtration process. The second stage is the Services Selection Board interview. That's a 3-day process. Sometimes it's 3, sometimes it's more than 3, in which you are tested for what they are looking for is what's termed as officer-like qualities, or in other words, leadership qualities. Now, leadership quality doesn't mean you have to be running faster than the others or jumping higher than the others. It means, are you able to take a team of people who may be better than you in many ways and get them to work together? Can you sort of forge that? Is that capability there?
So is it like people skills?
It's leadership skills. It is leadership skills. And also there's a psychometric testing. It's a very intense psychometric testing. It's ironical that even I think the police doesn't have psychometric testing during induction, but the army does. So they actually psychometrically test people to make sure that they aren't taking in somebody who can, have other
mess
issues.
things up. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, of course, but-
I had someone telling me that in this psychometric testing, the tests are like they'll give you one word like knife or blood and say form a sentence in 3 seconds. Is that correct? Like,
Yeah, so this is, by the way, this is nothing unique about the armed forces. These psychometric testing are instruments that are very commonly available and sort of tested instruments. So the idea, so this example, I'm telling you very, very simply, oversimplifying it. The idea is to see whether you have negative thoughts or positive thoughts. So you give you a knife, are you thinking about killing somebody or cutting the rope to save somebody, whatever it is. So that's the way of looking at it. And of course, I know that a lot of applicants and all, they have been coached by various people to, sort of artificially give positive. It doesn't work. It doesn't work because the testing team is very, very experienced and they can figure out straight away if you're trying to fake it. So, but interestingly, and this is the interesting part that I want to, sort of tell everyone who's listening, who's aspiring to it. So the way the process happens is very interesting. I think it's one of the finest lessons in HR that you can learn. I genuinely think I've never seen that example in any corporate, by the way. So what happens is, after the 2 or 3 days of your SSB, the Service Selection Board, all of the cadets, or not even cadets at that point of time, but all of the applicants, they are taken into the main hall at the end of it. Everyone is taken. Whether you're selected, not selected, you don't know at this point of time. And then the board president starts reading out the names of the people who have been rejected. And not rejected in this batch. He'll read out a name, let's say, I'm just making it up, but Abdul Kalam, applied in so-and-so date, got rejected. Kapil Dev, applied in so-and-so place, got rejected. So-and-so, got... He narrates that if you get rejected over here, there is a better future waiting for you.
Wow.
Right? I haven't seen an HR process where you take care of the sensitivity of the person who's not made it. And they'll also say that there's an officer, the cadet in the batch earlier who made it in his 8th attempt. So they make you feel, okay, theek hai yaar, it's not the end of the world, maybe something else. And then they announce the names of the people who have actually cleared it. So the SSB is a very intense process, and to my mind, you really cannot fake that process. You either have it in you or you don't have it in you. And if you don't have it in you, I often tell people, apply once. If God's grace you get in, fantastic. If not, do it once more time, because the first time you may not have been in your best or whatever, and then do it one more time. But 3 times, if it doesn't, of course, there are cases of people who have done it on the 8th attempt, some people who do it on the 11th attempt, starting from NDA, going all the way up to OTA. But I believe that process very accurately identifies, I mean, give or take, but broadly identifies the leadership qualities which are required to operate in that kind of an environment. That doesn't mean that the people who have been rejected from there cannot be exceptionally great leaders in other spheres. They will be, they can be, and they usually are. But the point is that what the forces are looking for is very different from maybe some of the other elements. And some element, like I'll give you an example. A leader in any other sphere, banking, real estate, need not have, or the criticality of physical courage is not that critical. But in the army...
Wait, could you explain that sentence?
Physical courage. Physical courage is the ability of a leader to put himself in danger.
His physical body.
Physical danger, right? I mean, I'll give you an example. Let's say I was working in an organization where I was the head of security. And let's say in that organization there is a major strike somewhere, or there is a situation that can go volatile, right? It is the leader's physical courage of being present there. And don't worry, everything will be okay. It'll be fine, which calms things down. So there all great leaders in my sort of even non-violent leaders need to have a lot of physical courage. If you take Gandhi also, the ability to take lathi after lathi requires a lot of physical. You're putting your body in danger, and that is a trait which is extremely important in combat. I mean, you may have a genius of a leader who can plan strategy, but unless he can lead the troops won't follow him.
And I think physical courage also translates into many other forms of leadership.
Of course it does. Of course it does, because physical courage is it's not just physical courage in terms of I'll go and face a bullet. Physical courage is also the endurance. How many days you can say. Great examples would be prisoners of war who have been subjected to interrogation and they don't lose their spirit. That is physical courage. Matter of fact, when I did my commando course many years ago, I still remember the chief instructor telling us this, that when the course ended, it's 35 days and 35 nights of pure hell. When the course ended and we were all sitting in that, like for the final dispersal lecture, I remember the chief instructor saying that you will never ever be in your life more physically fit than you are today. Wow. It is true, because 35 days of that intense. So firstly, your training before the commando course, then you come for the commando course, there's intense training. It happens in Belgaum.
What happens in the course? Like, could you expand it?
The long story, I'll tell you about what happens in that course. So basically, you realize very quickly that any such course, we have many such in the army. There is a commando course in Belgaum. There's a course that happens in Warangte in Assam, the CIJW, Counterinsurgency Jungle Warfare. There's another one called HAWS, High Altitude Warfare School. These are very, very physically challenging and intense courses. But I think the aim of this course, as the chief instructor pointed out, was not just physical fitness, because he says this. He says that on this day of your life, you're going to be the fittest in your life. After this, you're only going to deteriorate, which is true. Nobody can exercise for 18 hours a day. I mean, that's all you do in the commando course. You're physically like subjected. So that's not the point of this course. The point of this course is any time in your life, when you're going through a mess, when you're going through a challenge, you're being captured by the enemy, you're being tortured, you must remember that you survived the commando course. And if you have survived the commando course, you will survive anything. So it is a course on mental training. It's on mental, the ability to take huge amounts of mental stress and still be able to function to whatever, 50, 60, 70% of your normal operations. So the training is much more focused on introducing shock, introducing fear, introducing trauma, introducing exhaustion, and still getting your mind to solve problems, which is essentially what is often required in combat situations. So that is the training. And of course, there's a lot of academics that happen. So let me clear a myth that I was told by my teachers in school that you join the army, तेरे को पढ़ाई करने की जरूरत नहीं होगी. Let me clear that up front. Matter of fact, I have many friends in the IAS who very often pull my leg by telling me we do one exam in a year and after that we never write an exam. In the army, you will do one exam to enter and after that you will be studying hell of a lot, which is good. I think it's very good. I think leaders need to be knowledgeable, and also there's a lot of emphasis on technology, on leadership skills, on training. In the army, you are either preparing for battle or you're training. I mean, there is either you're fighting or you're preparing for fighting. So training is an essential part of that, and that carries through in your entire sort of career. You have various different intervention points, so you will complete. Like for example, let's say I'm just taking the army because I'm more familiar with the army, but the same is true for Air Force and the Navy. You will join the Indian Military Academy or the Officer Training School or whatever Officer Training Academy. And after that basic course where you're being trained across all spectrums of the army, you will be given a particular arm. It's called the choice of arm. You choose an arm. So most people don't know, but the army is consisting of many different units. You know, you have the infantry, the armored corps, the signals, the engineers, so many other, sort of corps and different lines of work, so to speak. So based on your aptitude, based on your liking, this is a process of selection whereby you are assigned a particular arm. Now, once you're assigned into that arm, then you are sent for specialized training into that particular discipline. So if I'm, let's say, mechanized infantry as I was, so I'll have to undergo all the courses of an infantry officer, which happens in Mau, and all the courses of a mechanized infantry officer, which happens in Ahmednagar. So this is the basic course where they say, okay, now it's a bit like, okay, you studied in the film institute. I'm just simplifying it, and now you want to become a cinematographer. So for cinematography, you will have a very, very specialized course which deals only with camera, whatever it involves. And then you will go for an advanced course in the same subject where you will be taught how to become an instructor. Because in the army, everything is taught by the same people. I mean, it's the army officers who teach the next generation. It's the leaders who will teach this. So I will go back to the same institute where I used to be a student as an instructor, if I am, of course, worthy of being an instructor. So this training continues throughout the career. So it's a great place to be if you like learning. But if there's somebody out there thinking that if I join the force, then I don't have to study, I'm sorry to bust that bubble right now. So anyway, after the training, I as I mentioned, I joined the mechanized infantry, and my first stint was in Sangrur.
So wait, I gotta dial you back one
Sure.
more question. With the commando training, like, could you just describe your most intense day in as much detail as possible?
Every day is intense.
Like with the drills or whatever.
It's so basically the commando course, as I mentioned to you, the broad pedagogy is that they, of course, take you to another level of physical fitness. They train you on how to operate in small teams. They train you how to pick up skills, which they train you how to work with any kind of the improvisation in the environment, how you can, well, literally.
Like Bear Grylls, like that Man versus Wild.
Yeah, man versus wild, but actually more to do with not just survival skills, but also the ability to kill skills. So it's not just about survival in the army. So if you're dropped, let's say, into enemy territory, it's not for you to survive and come back. You also have to create an operation there. You have to do something there. So it's physical fitness, weapons training. You're trained on different kind of weapons, weapons that you may find with the enemy, that kind of stuff. Then you are trained on demolitions, explosions. Escape and evasion is a major part of the exercise, a fascinating piece of the exercise where you're taken away from the academy by choppers and all of that, and you are put into enemy territory. and then from there you have to find your way back.
Actual enemy territory.
No, it's not actual. It's simulated. So obviously it happens in Belgaum. So you're taken 90 kilometers away. But it's almost a simulation, because what they do is they take you away and then they release you in buddy pairs. That's another very good learning that happens in the commando course, actually in the army. So there's no individual who's ever sent for a task alone, right? So always a pair, minimum a pair. So buddy pair who'll watch out for each other. Which, by the way, is one of the main reasons why mental health and stress is also under control, or at least better handled in the forces, because you always have one buddy. And that one buddy you can confess anything to. The guy knows you inside out. He knows your family, knows your. If you have a fight with your wife, he knows everything about you, right? So in this buddy pair, you're released one by one. And this buddy pair has to find their way back. They have to navigate. They can't use the roads in the dark. It's done in the night. So you have to rely on. And there are several battalions of troops who are deployed in that area whose mission is to catch you, right? And it's a fun activity for them, because for each officer they catch, they'll get 2 bottles of rum or something like that. So they are also very active about it. So it's obviously nobody's trying to kill you. But I have to tell you, it's almost, it is very traumatic, because if you're caught, they take you back to the starting point. So imagine you have done 40 kilometers out of the 60 and they catch you in the 40th kilometer, they'll put you back there. So usually you don't get caught, but that is the fear that you have in your head. So escape and evasion is a part of the exercise. Then you're taught many other skills in terms of the ability to read maps without compass, how to navigate without compass, how to move silently, how to kill silently. All of those things are taught in that course. Yeah.
So I have to ask you a little dark question, which is like, what is the mental training you're given about death and killing? Like, is there any kind of talk that someone has?
That's a tough question to answer. I think, well, that is a profession where you are going to see a lot of death, right? And a lot of trauma, there's no doubt. And police also, by the way. Police, I think, see more dead bodies per se, but here it is, you're going to put your own troops into danger. So, and at times you will kind of be involved in operations where someone else will die. So I think now there is a lot more focus on mental stress. The concept of post-traumatic stress disorder, all of these things are now becoming much more understood. I think when we were young officers, I don't think we had even that construct of, sort of. So if you came back from an operation and you were like, in jitters, which happens in the first, before you start getting more experienced. It was much more of, oh, come on, it's okay, it happens when you die. So it was much more of finding that in the ambience, this was part of the job. And you slowly became sort of accustomed to it, right? But now I think there is a lot more emphasis in terms of understanding what that does to a mind of a person. And by the way, these are also the things that are being tested out in your psychometric testing. That do you have the ability, or will you, suddenly go to pieces or whatever. It's not foolproof, because human beings also change as they evolve, but it's still a good filter. So I think earlier it wasn't to that extent, at least from my training, I remember. Now I think it's a much more, and not just the Indian Army, armies all over the world are becoming far more empathetic. Fascinatingly, I'll see if I can send you that link of it's a promo link for the British Army, where they're inviting the youth of Britain to join the army. And basically it talks about the fact that if you join the army, you'll always have someone you can talk to. So if you're feeling stressed, if you're feeling depressed, the army is the place to be. Because here we listen to you. In other organizations, they give a jack shit about what's happening in your personal life. Here, it's important to us. So they are actually advertising the fact that it is an empathetic organization where you can build relationships with people who truly will be your, blood friends, friends for life. And I think that's a very good step in acknowledging that, listen, these are not automatons, these are not robots, these are human beings. And if you ask human being to do something which is against the nature of what they've been taught culturally and all of that, there will be trauma, and this trauma needs to be handled. So I think now it's much better than what it used to be earlier.
Oh, that allows me to bring you back to the story.
But one other piece which I think is remarkable, which I think is very important for us to recognize and acknowledge, is that the training in the army also creates lifelong friends. Because I always believe this, you want to forge a team into a team. You want to forge a group of people into a team, just put them through a trauma. It's true, because if I ask you, where were you when 26/11 happened 12 years ago? You remember exactly where you were. You remember who was sitting on your right, who was sitting on, when you first saw it on TV and what happened. If I ask you where were you last Thursday, you'll have to check your smartphone. Because nothing happened last Thursday. But an incident which happened 12 years ago is etched in your mind because it was traumatic. You remember the teachers in college who were like traumatic teachers. You remember a traumatic experience. Trauma doesn't necessarily need to be bad. It just needs to be a spike or a dip or whatever. And I think that part of the training where you become friends with more than 200, 300 officers, and more than that actually, who are your course mates. And there is a right you have on a course mate. I can tell you, so this happened to me recently. I'd gone to meet a course mate of mine with a friend in a place called Nahan, which is the commando training, one of the commando training centers. So he's from the special forces and he was the chief instructor there. And my friend who was with me was shocked to learn that this officer and me, after leaving the academy, were meeting after 20, 25 years. Wow. Because the brotherhood was such as if we were meeting every day. Now, that to my mind is a wealth that is created there. Like practical examples, I am the local guardian to at least half a dozen army brats who are studying here in Bombay because they have a right over my house because their father and me were course-mates. It's almost like I'm their uncle. Actually, more than a matter of fact, one or two of them actually, I'm supposed to be the local guardian only for the excuse that they're staying at my place when they're doing something else. So it becomes like a family, and that bond is so valuable.
Yeah.
Especially as you grow older and older.
Yeah. That's the real wealth you receive.
That's the real
from
wealth. So
life.
I've always believed wealth is what you have got left after all your money is gone. After all your money is gone, whatever you've got left, that is wealth. Your goodwill, your friends, your ability to pick up the phone and raise maybe 50 lakhs if you have to raise it just on people who trust you, who have faith in you. That is real wealth. This money, Shani, I mean, you're seeing what is happening in COVID. Entire companies like WeWork wiped out overnight. So that is really not wealth. Wealth is that. And that career gives you a very intense value of that wealth. I'm sure it's there in other professions also, but nothing like what is there in the armed forces because of the nature of that.
It's also what I would like to call an enhanced experience of life. As in, like, so there's life where you're going for your regular 9 to 5, you're accumulating money, and that is your definition of wealth. But putting yourself through this way, you're developing lifelong bonds, you're developing this kind of mental training through those intense experiences, that enhances your whole viewpoint on life.
Not just enhances, you live a more richer life. So, I mean, I use this example very often that if you take your life right now, you're 27 years old, take your life, a conscious life, you'll be remembering God from the age of 7 or 8. So let's take 20 years. If I took your life of 20 years, and there's a question all of the listeners can actually just do this mental exercise and say, okay, fine. If your entire life was shot in a film, the old celluloid film, and we strung it up in this hall like that, and then I took a pair of scissors and started cutting bits and pieces out of it and stuck it back together, you won't even notice the difference. Because last Wednesday was exactly like this Wednesday and there's the same routine you're doing. You won't even notice the difference. Now, if you don't notice the difference, you might have not lived those years. Right? So if 8 years I can cut out with my scissors and you don't, then the 20 years, mein se, sir, 12 saal you have lived. Yeah? The remaining 8 years have gone and you're not. So I think the experience of the highs and the lows, the travel that it involves, different parts of the country that you see, different kind of individuals that you see, different kind of cultures you meet, that to my mind is life.
Yes, sir.
That is why travel is such an important form of education, because you are actually interfacing with other humans who are completely different from you. Not in that echo chamber of the same group of people whom you same ideas. So I think that is another very, very strong point of the armed forces career. It just gives you a completely, and of course our naval coastmates and Air Force coastmates, their exposure is also in other countries. They go to other countries, interface with them and all of that, which Army also gets, but much rarer because our exposures are usually in UN missions or when we go for some international courses. But I think it's an incredible way to live life, really.
Yeah. So and I have to ask you this because I'm the Masaledar podcaster, but what are your intense memories about going into battle? Like actual combat?
I don't want to make it sound as if I believe, and a lot of officers, a lot of my friends also believe that the only true heroes, as we call them, are dead people. Those who have lived through any combat experience. You cannot call them whatever act they have done, and not that I've done anything, but whatever they have done is not nothing compared to the people who actually died. So I think that only the real heroes can only be those who are, and of course, unless someone has survived some very traumatic thing. I think the most intense experience is not so much about. So I've been in a few situations where once the situation begins, you are like in a daze. You're just operating with muscle memory and all of that in a daze. I think the fear is before that. The apprehension is before that. And I genuinely think, in my case, I can tell you, and I'm sure in many other people when I've spoken to them, it's not so much the fear of what can happen to me, will I lose my leg, when will I die, and all of that. I think that is a fear, of course. But the bigger fear is that will I be able to do it? Will I be able to hold the responsibility given to me? Will I have the courage at that point of time?
Is there a strong sense of brotherhood also?
There is a very intense sense of brotherhood, and that is why when you're leading them, you cannot falter, and your confidence in yourself that kar paunga main, will I be able to do it? When the bullets start flying, what will really happen? So that blooding of course, after 2-3 skirmishes, it's a bit by public speaking. I mean, I'm using a very trivial example, but it's a little bit like public speaking. That the first time when you're doing it, you're scared of what I might do wrong. You might do your 100th talk, 1000th talk. You still have a light apprehend, which you should, because if you don't have that, basically it means you care a jack shit about your audience, or you're clinically insane. So you have that, but it's much more under control. So I think that transition from being afraid of a situation to being, okay, the situation is dicey, it's scary, something can go wrong, but we'll figure a way out of it. That is the transition of a leader, and that is, I think, the most challenging transition that leaders I had done to from that occasion. So it's not about physical bravado. It's about being accountable for other people's lives, right? That's a much bigger responsibility, because if your actions cause somebody else's death, you have to face the widow and the orphans of that kid and say, your father was under my command when he died, right? That burden of command which you have to bear, those are the things that actually make leaders much more afraid. Not afraid, but those are the things that weigh on a leader's mind much more than, because once the operations start, it's a blur. It's just a blur. It's your muscle memory which takes over. It's your training which takes over. It's the chaos of war is such, chaos of battle is such that you really cannot, I mean, as they say, all the best laid plans, they don't survive first contact with the enemy. Right? So I think that's the biggest fear, at least for me it was, and I'm sure for many other leaders I've spoken to, that will I be worthy of the command that has been given to me? That is.
So, like, when there is a situation like the Kargil war, where the entire army's heads are kind of turned towards that situation, what's the overall emotion in, like, a young cadet's life, or, like, someone who's just begun their tenure, like, in the army or even the Air Force? Like, is the thought that, okay, this is what my life has led up to? Like, what is
I think before the war, I'm not saying soldiers don't look forward to war. I don't think any soldier looks forward to war, because we know what a 7.62 bullet can do. We know when you get hit by a bullet, you don't sing a song and, it doesn't happen. You scream.
Have you ever been hit?
I have not been hit, but I have seen people, and it's terrible. It's painful. So I don't think soldiers look forward to war. But all soldiers know that this is the reason why they have been trained. It's a bit like you have been training to become, I don't know, a cricketer all your life, and one day you're called to play for the Indian cricket team. You know the ball is going to come at 180 kilometers an hour. You know if it hits your head, you will die. But that's what you have trained for. That's what you expect. So there's definitely a sense of, I'm using the word with a lot of caution, eagerness to say, yeah, I want to go. I want to participate in this. The battle is happening. I want to go and participate. And which, by the way, very common. It's very, very common that when a battalion gets deployed to an operational area, like in Siachen or Kargil, officers who are on deputation, who are on some other unit in a comfortable posting and all, they will leave that and come to join the unit. They will volunteer. They'll say, I don't want to stay in Delhi because my Paltan is going into operation, so I have to be with the Paltan, right? So there is that sense of, how can my boys go into battle and I'm not there with them? There is that sense of, that sense of participation is there. So I think, but at the same time, soldiers also know that what happens in Kargil is not what happens in the movie LOC. It's a very different reality. And
Can you break that down a little more?
of course, I mean, you it's one thing to see somebody dying in screen, you know. वो ठीक है, अक्षय कुमार मर गया, वो दोबारा जिंदा हो जाएगा अगली पिक्चर में. Another thing, when you lose a person, that family is devastated for the rest of their lives. The wife will have to bring up the children by herself. The children won't have a father. The financially, the family may be in a very, very different situation. So it's death is a permanent mistake. Okay, our mistakes come home in body bags. It's not like this quarter we did not meet the target, we'll make up for it in the next quarter. This quarter, if you create a widow, she remains a widow for the rest of her life. So there is that sense of reality, which is obviously not captured in films. Films is for entertainment. So you shouldn't. I mean, the only war film that I would say, one of the few war films which is accurate, is something like Saving Private Ryan. That tells you what combat is actually like. Most of the other movies are much more about entertainment and bravado and all of that stuff. So I think soldiers understand the reality more than what people see on in movies and TVs. And although many people may have joined the army seeing Border or Rambo or something like that, but when you join, you see the reality there, and the reality, like any profession, is extremely different from what you see. Look at a shoot that happens for a song sequence, right? I mean, if you've seen a shooting of a song sequence over here, but days it takes to get that 3-minute song. Now, somebody watching that, क्या मजे हैं एक्टर के यार, क्या नाच रहा है गाना. You know how many times the actor would have had to do it in the heat and again repeat, again take after take, and they're exhausted. Sometimes they have fever, they still have to do it. So the reality on ground is usually very, very different from what is depicted in an entertainment medium. The entertainment medium's intention is to entertain, not to educate you on reality. So I think that difference is there between the films and what really happens in real life.
Yeah. So like, I mean, so in the 90s you were serving like as a soldier.
Yeah, from 87 to 98.
What was that journey like? Like what were...
So I was in Punjab. That was my first posting in a place called Sangrur. And 1987, Punjab was still not out of the woods in terms of terrorism. So there's still a lot of operations, minor skirmishes and cleanups that were happening. So that's where I cut my teeth, so to speak. My second tenure was in Siachen. I'm talking about my combat tenures. So Siachen was, honestly, there's nothing to wow about it. And I'll tell you why. Because 80% of the army has been in Siachen. So this whole idea of I was in Siachen, so 80% of the army has been in Siachen, because every year we have 6 to 7 battalions there. Every year these 6 battalions get rotated. We've been there for more than 38, 39 years now. So you do the math, you'll figure out that by and large every unit would have been there. So
just for the sake of youth hype, could you just describe Siachen a bit? Like,
of course,
what's it like?
So Siachen is, of course, known as the highest and the coldest battlefield in the world. This is, I'm simplifying it, but essentially it is in the top of the northernmost part of India, you can say. And the contention is, so what happened is in 1971, when the lines were being drawn, 71 was the last, when that area, not Siachen, but south of Siachen was, we had some operations happening there in Turtuk and a few places. After that, the understanding that we have is that up to point NJ9842, there's a point on the map, and the line thereof is Indian territory. Pakistanis interpret that line thereof in a different way. We say line thereof and we move up north, they move like this. So there is a area which is under contention, which is normal with bordering countries, and especially hostile bordering countries. It happens. It is, the altitudes there range between 18 to 22,000 feet. 18,000 feet, to put it in reference, is Khardungla Pass. I'm sure many of the listeners might have gone to Leh and with that headache gone to Khardungla Pass 10 o'clock in the morning and returned by 11 o'clock and lain down for 2 days. 18,000 feet is like where the posts are, where soldiers will spend anywhere between 3 months, sometimes 6 months on top of that post. You're mostly existing on canned food. You are very low oxygen, very low. So again, it's very difficult to explain to people what minus 40 is. The temperatures dip to about minus 40, minus 45. Easy way for you to understand what minus 40 is: when you go home today, put your hand in the freezer of your fridge. That's minus 19. So if you exponentially double it, not incrementally, exponentially double it to minus 40, then you understand what minus 40 is, and try and keep your hand inside the freezer for about 2 minutes, and you will realize what it means. And then try and visualize people who have to live in that conditions for 1 year. So that was my sort of second operational tenure. My third one was as a part of a UN peacekeeping contingent in Angola.
So once I got to dial you back a little bit to
Sure.
Siachen a little more. I have a couple of questions. The first question is, if you ever meet people from the Pakistani troops, what's the underlying emotion of an Indian soldier? Like, is the emotion that this is the enemy, or is there a sense of respect that, hey, you've gone through probably a parallel journey to me, and maybe one day we might meet in battle? Like, that's the first question. And second question is more about Siachen. Have you seen people like break down there? Like, are there mental breakdowns? Because that's possibly, at least according to commercial perspective, as in most Indians would believe that Siachen is the most extreme environment an Indian soldier would have to go through.
It is one of the most extreme environment. There are environments which are more extreme than that, right?
Like,
There are certain areas like
okay,
DBO and several other places where, at least in Siachen, I would say that at least the resource, the airlifts and all work much better. There are certain areas which are, and always remember, it's not a set of circumstances which can be compared. Like, for example, if I were to say that serving in Siachen is very, very tough, serving in a submarine is equally tough.
why?
You are inside a tube which is inside the water. If you got claustrophobia, imagine if you got claustrophobia and you are inside that, and you know that any point of time one of these systems fails, I'm in a steel coffin which will go down, as it did happen. It has happened. So it is not about a temperature. It is about the fragility of your life, fragility of uncertainty, where you don't know next 3 hours. Maybe you will get hypothermia. Maybe you will get pulmonary edema. Maybe oxygen will run out. So it is that uncertainty which makes it traumatic.
What's
Right?
the training to combat those situations?
So, of course, when troops are going to any operational area, there are two types of training. One is what we call area familiarization. So, anybody who is being in all battalions which are inducted into Siachen, they go through a process in a place called the base camp, where they are trained for a duration in mountaineering skills, rescue skills, climbing, slithering, how to take out people, how to patrol, all of that stuff they are trained. And of course, then there is that mental toughening which has been happening over a period of time, and that is also part of training. When you are being constantly, sort of being put through stressful conditions, that's also part of the training. So your question about like, honestly, I don't think it's a bit like I explained this to my friends by saying that, let's say you're fighting a court case with somebody, right? Whatever. God forbid not, but let's say you're
You're
fighting.
talking about the Pakistani soldier.
No, I'm
first.
just a Pakistani soldier. I'm giving that to you an example. And let's say you have a lawyer, and one day you see your lawyer talking to the opposite party's lawyer, and they're happily talking. Hey, buddy, hell, tu isse dost hai kya? You should be fighting. Now, the Indian Army soldier is acting on the orders of the government of India. Like I often say this, the Indian Army is the last 100 meters of the government's policy, whatever the government's policy is. So if the government's policy is to support the Tamil rebels, then the Indian Army does that. If it is to now say, no, now we will not support the Tamil rebels, we will support the Sri Lankan government, that is also the Indian Army is doing that. So it's not acting on its own. It's fortunately we are in a democracy, so it acts under the direction of the political establishment. So to that extent, I don't think there's any personal enmity. What do I have personal enmity against? I mean, you are an Indian and you will cheer when India fights against Pakistan in a cricket match, and you'll root for India. But if you go abroad and your roommate or a classmate is a Pakistani, you're not going to say, "Oh, sala main tera gardan kaatunga," because it's not like that. I don't think there is a hatred for the other side. And I think anybody, my belief, anybody who disrespects his enemy is being fundamentally stupid. Because you may not agree with the other side, he may be the enemy, but you can't disrespect you. If you do that, you'll be stupid because you'll make mistakes. You'll be overconfident. You'll think, but whatever. Soldiers are, I think, all over the world, soldiers are equally good. They are equally patriotic. I don't think patriotism is the prerogative of any army. And soldiers have a sense of honor regardless of the size of their country. So if you take a guy from, say, the Sri Lankan Special Forces, he's as patriotic and as good and as willing to die for Sri Lanka as from the United States SEALs. It's just because US has got a huge budget doesn't mean that their commando is 100 times better than a special forces guy from, let's say, Nepal. It's not true. And definitely not true. Maybe he may be better equipped and all that, but definitely not true in terms of patriotism. Or, I mean, you've seen the Vietnamese beat the Americans. Where did that come from? It comes from a sense of, or the Afghanis, Taliban, had now sent back the US. It took US more than, a decade plus and $5 trillion to finally accept, qualified arrangement, which many people might call a defeat. And so I don't think this saying that those troops are stupid, we are superior, I think that's very silly. So I don't think there is any personal enmity to somebody. Yes, when operations are happening, yes, in the heat of that battle, there may be instances where certain things will happen that may make you hate that particular unit that you are fighting against. It does happen. But having said that, I think you may not know this, that in Kargil war, there were citations, which were gallantry award citations that were written by the Indian army on Pakistani officers.
Like testimonials.
Yeah, no, we said that इसको मिलना चाहिए, तुम्हारा जो भी होता है तुम निशान हैदर देते हो, जैसे हमारा परमवीर चक्र है, महावीर चक्र है, इसको देना चाहिए तुम लोगों को. What he has done is creditable, and I am saying it as the enemy, that this guy fought well. He did his job as a soldier, and as a soldier to soldier, you respect that.
Fought well is a combination of your mental decisions as well as your physical valor.
Both of that. I mean, physical courage is an essential part of fighting. So if you find a soldier who has fought well, regardless of which army, you have to admire, yeah, banda hai to tough. I mean, he's a good guy. It's like if you're in a sports competition and let's say you're competing against somebody. Let's say you're boxing. I don't know if you ever boxed, but in the academy, we have to do boxing also as part of our training. You may have beaten that guy, but if the guy made you fight every inch, you have to respect that guy. You can't say everybody befoof hai. Not true, because he made you fight for every inch of it, and he probably pushed your boundaries to another level. So I don't think, to answer your question, there is any personal hatred of soldiers. In professional soldiers, there is no personal hatred amongst your enemy or whatever. I don't think so.
So this is honestly one of the best podcasts we've had, just because of the perspective.
Well, actually, let me be honest here. I'm just telling you the stories of other people. And that is why it is. So I'm the storyteller here. I'm not the one who's the story doer. So obviously, when you tell stories of so many different people who have done it, it will seem to be good, but that's because of their stories.
Is there a sense of, I mean, for lack of a better word, spirituality within like the army?
Oh, of course. I think...
And what is spirituality for an army man?
So I used to tell this to my friends that when you get posted to the glacier, you become a little more religious. And there are two reasons for that. One reason is, of course, you're literally closer to God, physically. The second reason is when your life is hanging by a balance, when you don't know, like look back in your own life, the maximum time you pray to God is when you're in some deep shit. Someone loved one is lying in the hospital, someone is, accident hone wala hai, something before an exam, or you're praying to God, bargaining with God, please God, ye karoge to main wahan aapko Vaishno Devi mein aake, milunga, ye all of that stuff. So I think in any kind of a fearful situation, spirituality does play an extremely important part. So much so that every army battalion of the world, not just in the Indian Army, will have a spiritual teacher. We'll have, like in a battalion, there'll be a Panditji. If it's a Sikh unit, there'll be a Granthi. There will always be, like in the US Army, there's a chaplain who will come with you in the battle. He's a soldier. Because when you are faced with death, then you have to make peace at some way, and that peace usually comes with a sense of spirituality. Don't confuse it with religion. I'm saying spirituality. So you feel that
presence of God or
presence of a force that you appeal to. And you say, please see me through this. Ironically, the other side is also praying to the same guy, apparently.
And yeah, definitely the days you spoke about before a battle, I am dead sure that higher force is a part of that days as well.
Of course, it is. A matter of fact, just before any combat operation begins, any operation, before you're being launched, before field firing begins, before training begins, there's a proper puja that is carried out. Blessings are sought. And you have local deities who are there, who are sometimes like there are these anecdotal stories about, in the glacier there is a temple which is called the pressure cooker Baba Mandir. And the story is that a heat-seeking missile was fired, which went and banged into that pressure cooker and blew that up, thus saving about 20 people who were in the barracks very close by. Now, pieces of that, aluminium pieces of that pressure cooker are kept in a shrine and they are worshipped. Now, where does that sense of spirituality come with a piece of aluminium from a pressure cooker? It is a symbolism that this saved lives, and therefore there is some power in this. And you start seeking solace in anything that can give you solace. And spirituality is usually the solace that most humans sort of come to when we are in our time of fear. Real. I'll give you an example that you must have gone through. Most people would have gone through. Remember the last time you were in an aircraft when we went through severe bumps, not the normal, but severe. When you were like, your heart was in your mouth, and you were making promises to, if I get out of this alive, I'll spend more time with my parents, I'll do this, I'll do that. You're bargaining because you feel that my life, and that bargaining is happening with whom? It's happening with, you're not bargaining with your dad or with your mom or with your boss. You're bargaining with some power that you reach out to when you are in deep trouble. That, to my mind, is a form of spirituality. I mean, you don't have to do it only then. Many people have that form of spirituality. Many people will carry some token, some metal piece, some, this amulet or some bracelet. Someone's mother has given them something. There's a lucky coin. What are these? These are symbols of getting a sense of courage from some inanimate object. But that inanimate object symbolizes a belief that you have, that ye agar hoga to I'll be safer than that. It happens.
Again, I just want to add one quick line here because we have a lot of spirituality talk on this podcast. A line that I read early on in life, fortunately, was in one of the spiritual books I read. It's called The Autobiography of a Yogi.
Yogi, yeah, read that.
You've read? Yeah. So a line that stayed with me was, if you don't welcome God in the summers of your life, he may not be there in the winters to protect you. So it just was kind of a character switching moment for me. Anyway, coming back to army talk. So like I've got to ask you about your time in Africa as well. Also, like when your Siachen, but before I ask you that, when your Siachen tenure is ending, what goes on in a soldier's head? Because you've gone through like a really harsh kind of situation. You've put your physical body, your mental body through it. So is there a sense of, okay, this is done now, let's move on to the next one? Like what goes on in an army officer's head through the journey of his career? Like, are you thinking about the next mission? Are you thinking about your career?
So see, I honestly don't want to be pretentious to pretend that I can tell you what goes on in army officers' heads. I mean, each head is a different head and each head thinks of it in a different way. So it would be very silly of me to assume that I can tell you what went on in my head. I can tell you what happened with the... I think there's an immense sense of relief when you end a mission without losing lives or with losing as minimal lives as possible and achieving the objective. So if the objective is to safeguard that sector of wherever you're deployed for a period of 1 year and you manage to do that, you make sure that most of your soldiers, ideally all of them are alive, not injured, and you have handed over the sector that you've got to the next battalion, which has got to take over in a good state, which means, the rations are stocked and everything is over. It's a bit like a CEO handing over to the next person. You have a sense of satisfaction that I'm leaving under good conditions. That is at least in my mind, that was the foremost thing. I still remember my CO when I was going up, Colonel Dinanath Verma, I think one of my finest teachers in leadership. Ironically, he was also my teacher in the infantry school. He was an instructor there, and then I had the honor to serve with him in his battalion, one of the crack battalions of the Indian Army, 12 JACRF, as it's called, 12th Battalion of the JACRF Regiment, Jammu and Kashmir Rifles.
Do you come out a different person at the end of it?
Of course you do. You come out as a different person. You come out with a different person as a perspective to life. You look at life differently. You look at what was important. It happens. Let's say you survive a car crash. I'm sure you must have had an accident or whatever, or you survive anything. You come out as a very different person. You say, listen, I was almost gone. And I need to relook at my life now in a very, very different way. Right? I'll tell you a story, a very interesting story about this too. I had a coursemate of mine, unfortunately he is no more, Tomar, and Arvind Tomar. And he used to actually say this. He said, so we had another coursemate, I don't want to take his name to protect his privacy. So he was, when he was in NDA, if he's listening, he'll know it. All my coursemates will know who I'm talking about. When he was in NDA, he dived into the swimming pool and his head hit the he's a very good diver, so he dove straight into the bottom and he went unconscious and he was inside the pool, and by the time the instructors went in and got him out and all of that, he was taken to the hospital and he was declared dead. And then again his heart restarted and all that, and he survived, and of course he after that finished his training, came to Indian Military Academy and was one of the most physically fit guys. But he was very, very finicky about stuff in life. Everything had to happen exactly the same way, and very good quality. But so Arvind Tomar used to tell him, you died. Every day is a bonus for you, yeah. You died. Your life ended. Each day you are living now is a bonus for you. Live that day with the gratitude that this is a bonus, which is true for all of us. It's true for all of us. Just because you have not fallen into a pool and died does not mean that that accident couldn't have happened today morning. It could have. Anything could have happened. I mean, millions of people are diagnosed with life terminal diseases every day. It's just a lottery that you and I are not in it as of now. It can happen anytime. But that attitude to know the fragility of life, to know that it's very, very temporal, all the things that, give us joy and value and all of that can vanish like this. I mean, very often people tell me that, I'm very stressed and all of that. And I say, one of your reports by mistake is diagnosed as some terminal disease. Tera sara problem ek hi din mein khatam ho jayega. So I think we don't need to wait for that to happen to us. If we are cognizant of it and realize how blessed we are. Actually, ironically, everyone who's listening to this right now, able to understand English, has enough resources to be able to watch this, whatever it may be, has enough education to comprehend it. You already belong to 0.00001% of Indian humanity, which has got these planets lined up, right? So instead of looking at how many planets had to fall in line for you or me or whoever to be here where they are, I mean, the right education, right family, right background, right people took a bet on us, right people pulled us out of trouble at the right time. So many planets had to fall in line for us to be where we are today. I think you will automatically feel a sense of happiness, because if any one of these planets had moved aside, any one of them, I mean, but for the grace of God, what's the difference between you and a migrant labor who had to walk like 800 kilometers and died 5 kilometers before he reached his house? It's a lottery. It's not because you work harder than him. He works probably 10 times harder than you. So I think if we put those things in perspective, I have a theory on this, by the way. Have you noticed that all the great religious places are located in very difficult to reach places? अभी तो जाता है हेलीकॉप्टर वगैरह वैष्णो देवी में, बट पहले जब बना था तिरुपति तिरुपति, you actually had to walk up 6-7 hours. Now it's actually very counterintuitive, because if you are building an institution where you want maximum people to come, you should locate it in a convenient place, no? So footfall will be more. But this, I think, is the highest form of design thinking. These places which are hard to achieve, hard to reach physically, they serve 2 or 3 things. First thing is, you will not go there for badi riff-raff kind of exam pass kara do ye. You will go there with serious problem. My mother is ill, father is dying, this, that, whatever, or I am dying. It will be a serious problem. Secondly, when you will go through that journey, it gives you a sense of agency. Ki main kuch kar raha hu. My child is suffering from cancer. I am doing something. You can't do anything for the child. You're not a doctor. You can't do anything beyond taking the child to a doctor and back. But you get a sense of agency that I am putting myself through trauma to assist my child. Most importantly, though, what happens is during that journey, you listen to the troubles of others. And then you realize, boss, itna to nahi hai yaar. I mean, I'm okay. My trouble is not. That, to my mind, is an exercise which we can start doing ourselves. We don't need life to do this to us. We can do that. And one of the reasons why I think, or one of the ways in which we can get joy and happiness, is actually to spend a lot of time with situations and individuals who are much less privileged than us. Not to get a sense of, oh, he doesn't have it and I have it, but to get a sense of how lucky I am that what I have, which I'm taking for granted, is something that somebody else is coveting for their entire life and still will not get it, right? Moment you do that, I think the comparison with somebody who's underprivileged than you will give you happiness. The comparison with someone who's overprivileged than you will always give you sadness. That's the rule of life. So I think that's where it kind of helps.
Yeah, and I'm sure every day in the army kind of helps exercise that muscle as well, of just perspective.
It does, but let me not, I mean, it's not like every day in the army you're facing combat, or it's there in the back of your head, but army, like any other organizations, is got 40 to 50% of what you don't see is the regular work that has to happen and all, which is as routine as any other career. So every career, when you ask a fighter pilot, he'll do about 70% of the work which is completely routine. It's only that 30% which is true in every profession. You look at the actors, look at what you see is usually not what you get, because what you get is a much bigger pie in which some pieces you will like, most pieces you won't like. The trick is to find a profession where at least 40 to 50% of the stuff that you're doing is very exciting stuff, which keeps you excited.
I have to ask you the question about family, and then we'll move into your Africa tenure. But what's like an army officer's sense of family like? Because are you staying away for a while? How does that work out?
So once again, I want to, many of these answers which I want to give, I don't want to make it as if it's like you look at merchant navy, look at people who are sailing, or thousands and thousands, lakhs of people who work abroad in Dubai or wherever, and from all walks of life, who probably see their family once in a year. If they're lucky, maybe twice in a year. So this is not a. Having said that, in the army, it's pretty much a given that in your 20, 25 years career or whatever time you spend over there, there will be substantial portions of that time that you will spend away from your immediate family. The fortunate part of that is that neither you will be away from your larger family because you're part of the unit, and neither will your family be away from the larger family because she is also part, or in case the spouse is the lady officer, the spouse is also a part of the larger family. So, by and large, they'll be looked after. There is somebody you can reach out to. One phone call will make sure that someone will, watch out for them. And that, what we call a regimental spirit, or a spirit de corps, of saying that brother officer's family or whatever, is a very strong mechanism there. So to that extent, I think it is part of the career, which is like par for the course. That's what happens there.
So what happened in Africa? Like, and how was that different, like, from India? And how did you land up there?
No, so this is part of a UN mission. Indian Army keeps sending troops into United Nations missions. We are actually one of the largest contributors of troops to UN missions. And very, very well respected, by the way, in United Nations.
How is the Indian Army perceived, like, by all of
Very, very highly respected army, for the simple reason that we are one of the most combat experienced armies in the world. So we have fought in glaciers, mountains. We have fought in jungles of Assam. We have fought in deserts of Rajasthan. We have fought in amphibious. We got huge coastline. We know amphibious operations and all that. So, and a very, very battle hardened army, because not very many armies have been fighting for so many years as India has been. I mean, we've been fighting since independence.
Being battle hardened plays a role in actual combat.
Of course it does.
Because of strategy and
seasoning of troops. Imagine if you took an experienced crew to go and shoot with, say, Sachin Tendulkar. The way they will operate there, they'll not be phased by you take a first person, the guy will be in awe, right? So because you're doing it for the first time. So battle hardening is, matter of fact, in training, we have a concept called battle inoculation, where there's artillery firing, machine gun fire, all of that happening, live fire. There's not simulation, live fire. And you are like crawling in trenches under that. So there is that simulation. But there is no replacement in training for actual combat. And I think Bruce Lee said it the best if you watched Enter the Dragon, where O'Hara comes and breaks the board in front of him, and he summarizes it in one line: boards don't hit back. Targets don't shoot back when you are in training. And when in real combat, targets shoot back, that exposes a completely different side of combat, because now they're shooting back at you. So it's not about your marksmanship, it's your marksmanship while you're being shot at. So combat experience, so in soldiering, that is the benchmark. So obviously, because the Indian Armed Forces have been one of the most experienced in that space, and very battle hardened and a very efficient army, the operational level at least.
Is it like I'm just kind of going with the stereotype. For example, in cricket, every cricket team kind of brings an element of their own country into the game. Like the West Indies brings their relaxed flair, power, things like that. The Indian cricket team is supposed to be one of the most intelligent teams. So does that same rule apply to the army, where?
I don't know, but I don't want to do a comparison between cricket and this, but definitely cultures of the armies are different. And by the way, the culture of the Indian army is also multitude of cultures. Multitude of, and when I'm saying this, most of the army officers and to a certain extent army brats will understand what I'm saying. For example, if you are commissioned into, let's say, a certain battalion, I don't want to name it because, people know what I'm talking about. You are expected to do a lot of ma bhan, because that's the
culture,
language of those people, even to appreciate something. I don't want you to beep it out.
It's all good, sir.
So, Whereas if you get commissioned into, say, the Madras battalion, your way you treat the troops has to be very, very different from the way you treat troops, let's say, in a Sikh Paltan. They're very different cultures. So
What's the underlying cultural trait that ties all of these together?
that's a very good question that you asked. I genuinely believe this is something that corporations can learn from the army. Really, they can. So if you look at the Indian Army, there are multitude of regiments. Each regiment, so we are a caste composition army, as you're aware. So the troops are taken from a certain area. So you have the Gurkha, Bihar, Jat, Maratha, all of these are taken. Of course, you have all India castes also. There are certain, like Special Forces is all India caste. There are certain armored regiments which are all India. My own battalion was all India caste. All composite. But you have certain, Now each one of these regiments has a different culture. They have a different culture, they have a different food habits are different. Madras battalion much more rice oriented, Northern battalion is much more wheat oriented. All of this is different. Everything is different. The way they dress, the way they talk, the way the orders are passed, everything is different. But when the chief of army says half turn right, 1.5 million people know it's 45 degrees. There's no debate in that. So it's a very interesting phenomenon that corporations should study, that while you have independent cultures in each of the departments, you can have that. I mean, I worked in Reliance, say, for example, the culture of the oil refining area is very, very different from, say, retail. Very different from geo. Culture is very different. But there's a common vocabulary. So when the common vocabulary is half turn, nobody has a debate. It's 45 degrees. I think yaar 22 nahi hai, 45 hai, 45 nahi, 56 hai. It's not. It's one. So if you are able to create a common operational vocabulary, you can allow multitude of cultures to flourish, because you do need different cultures. So I'll give you an example, and I think so when I was working with Reliance, you had in the same campus the oil and gas, establishment, and also geo, right? So very interesting, because I used to head risk and security and new ventures there, and when I joined there, I was fascinated that if you have to go in the campus, Shardul knows it, that you pretty much have to swipe your card everywhere. At every door, you have to swipe the card. Now, so much so that security teams used to take pride in the fact that, kind of, that when people go home, वो घर में भी bathroom में ऐसा करता है, because it's so ingrained into their head. Now, when the geo crowd came, and we are a young crowd, the average of geo, as you're aware, is pretty much your age, and a young leader and all of that, they found this very, very restrictive. Why am I in a bloody prison camp? Why do I need to do this everywhere? And it was like felt that you don't trust us, you don't believe us. Why do you have to do all of this all the time? Now, this is clearly a mismatch of cultures, and they don't know, they are perceiving something as bad because they don't know the origin of the reason behind that. The origin of the reason is, in an oil and gas refining environment, it's a very, very high security environment, because the slightest of leaks can explode the whole refinery. Care has to be, I don't know if you know this, that vehicles that go into the refinery, they have special equipment fitted in the exhaust so that no spark comes out. Your boots are checked to make sure there are no nails. It's to that degree. There's no question of carrying a lighter or anything. No sparking stuff can be carried. More importantly, as the head of risk of a refinery, I need to know where each and every individual is. Because let's say there is a fire, and I have to bring down a firewall to protect 2,000 people, which will kill 50 people inside. And I have to take that call. I need to know exactly where each and every person is. Now that DNA, which requires you to put where exactly, insurance claim करने के लिए भी पता होना चाहिए ना, where you were. Let's say there is God forbid, there is an accident and bodies are burnt beyond recognition. The only record is where you were, right? The only record that you were in that plane and your wife can claim insurance after the crash happens is the passenger manifest. Your dead body is not found. So, sorry to be macabre, but that is the culture origin. Now it's being viewed by another group as very, very totally like a prison and all that. So it's very important to realize that a conglomerate will have multiple cultures in multiple divisions, because the requirement of that job is, I'll give you an example. I used to be CEO of a company called Automart India, which is now known as First Choice. It was a startup at that point of time. It was all about .coms and this and that and all. T-shirts and coming in shorts to office, like pretty much your ambience here, was like, okay, it was fine. Matter of fact, it was expected to do that. But then I used to head another company called Mahindra Special Services Group, which was much more about high-end security, the men in black. And there you had to be in a suit and a tie always, because that's the culture of the service that you're delivering, right? So I think organizations can have, and as the Indian Army has, multitude of working cultures and their own emotional cultures. But when it comes to operations, they have one common vocabulary. So you can have multiple cultures so long as you have a common denominator of a common vocabulary. I think that's a great lesson to be learned from there.
So while I got that that's the underlying factor, but in terms of culture, is there some kind of emotion that also ties Indians together? Like again, I'd like the only reason I'm bringing up the Indian cricket team is because I can't think of another metaphor to kind of closely relate it to. But when you think of an Indian cricket team, you think of okay, great batsmen since generations. Possibly because I don't know, maybe it's something in our genetics which makes our reflexes good or we're technically sound or our wrists are more mobile. So is there anything that kind of represents all Indian soldiers? Is it the sense of, I don't know, maybe intelligence, where people, a lot of Indians consider themselves to be one of the smartest populations in the world?
No, so I mean, it's like many years ago when you went to the US. It's actually happened to me. It's not anecdotal. Actually, it has happened to me. A guy has brought his laptop to me and said, "Can you fix this to me?" It's actually happened to me. It actually happened to me. So now that's a stereotype because you're known by that stereotype. I mean, I don't follow. I'm sorry to disappoint, but I don't follow cricket at all. I mean, but I can sense why. So when you are facing a 6'6" bowler who weighs 180 kilos or whatever, and he's tossing a ball at you at the speed of 200 kilometers an hour, you can't fight that with force. You have to use technique to use that same guy's speed and twist your wrist and use that force to go. It's a bit like jiu-jitsu. So if you're not as physically strong as your opponent, you have to use a high-end form of technique, which is basically what the cricket team has evolved into. Because you can't have sheer, massive, fast bowlers who by sheer bulk and size will propel that ball at a speed. You can't. So you have to have technical players who will play with the mind of the opponent and play chess with them rather than playing brute force with them. I mean, of course, I'm oversimplifying. It's not like other people don't have technique and all, but that's how the orientation begins, right? So similarly, in the armed forces also, I think I wouldn't say Indian Army is a broad term. The Gurkhas behave very differently, Nagas behave very differently, Khalsas behave very differently. There's a very different culture. Matter of fact, even in certain kind of operations, there are certain kind of troops who do very, very well because of their inherent, the Gurkhas are known as stoic, quiet warriors. And they're known superb for fighting rear guard battles, which means that they're surrounded, but they will fight a rear guard battle to make sure that last man, last round. Khalsa units are supposed to be very, very exploitative. You give them a situation, they will exploit that situation. That is the same.
Aggressive.
No, exploitative. So the same reason why decades ago, when you were not even born, you find Sikh Indians in Canada, in Australia. कैसे पहुंच गया वहाँ कंटेनर में बैठ के ये वो कर कुरा के पहुंच गया वहाँ. That's exploitative nature. I'm using the word in a positive sense, not in a negative sense.
As in ready, dedicated.
No, dedicated to everyone is. I'm saying that their ability to say, okay, let me try this. वहाँ जाके देखते हैं क्या होता है. No, whatever. The ability to go away from family, go into foreign lands and experiment over there. Very, very, sort of a adventure seeking outside my own. Certain other troops may be much more inward and therefore much more. So these are cultural nuances, which is there. I mean, you can't expect to lead an organization in Chandigarh the same way you will lead it in Pondicherry. Very different cultures. Very different cultures. In Chandigarh, you are expected to be a little that's your attitude. In Pondicherry, you have to be much more docile, much more, because that's the culture of the place. It's not like people are, one is superior or one is inferior. It's different cultures. So the Indian soldiers are known for their professionalism. They are definitely known for their intelligence. There's no debate on that. Indian soldiers are feared in many countries that you will see our equipment and you will reverse engineer it, which is true. We do that very often. We'll see something, we'll modify it. I don't want to name it specifically, but there are several equipments that we use well beyond the ranges given by the manufacturer by doing our own modifications and taking it to another level.
Jugaad finds its way into the army.
Everywhere. I think Jugaad originated in the armed forces because when you have to improvise with no resource and your life is at stake, you better invent something and you make this. Not your business, it's your life at stake. So, yeah, I think those are the traits for which the Indian armed forces are, respected all over the world, in the armies of the world also. And of course, there are many other places where we have taken part. The Indian Army takes part in international commando competitions and all that, where we are usually in the top 3. So it's a fairly experienced and battle-hardened army, and gets its credit in those areas and operational excellence.
What was it like in Africa? Was it more of the same?
Africa is different. All UN peacekeeping missions are different than, because you're not really fighting an enemy there. It's no enemy. I mean, you're not taking your troops and saying Bharat Mata ke liye hum lad rahe hain. Because, guys, why one African is killing another one? Why the hell are we putting our nose into it? I think there it is much more about inspiring them with the fact that they are brand ambassadors of India. You're wearing the India badge on your shoulder. Everything that you do will reflect on not just the Indian army, but on the nation of India. And you discover that exercising restraint at times is more nerve-wracking than actually being in combat, because you have to exercise restraint quite a bit.
Can you use simpler words to explain that?
So normally what happens is you are afraid of going into a battle, or apprehensive about going into battle. But sometimes not launching force also requires a lot of restraint. And that restraint might be more difficult than actually launching at times.
Tolerance.
Tolerance, saying, okay, fine, it's okay. Let's not react now. We have to cool the situation down. We have to bring the situation down, make it cooler. So that requires a different, you might grit your teeth and be angry at what the other person has said, but you have to calm the situation down. And
So what is the context? Like, why were you in Angola? Like, what?
so the UN I was part of a contingent which had gone there, and basically what happens is whenever the UN declares a peace settlement between, like in Angola, it was between the ruling government and the rebels. These were rebels or whatever. The UN intervention there is to make sure that both sides are obeying the rules of the agreement. So there are three components of every UN mission. One component is called the military staff officers, who run the country, because the country has to be restarted. No, war-torn country, pani, bijli, medical aid, all of that has to be restarted. So who will do that? Basically, it will be people who will be coming from various different armies of the world. Even not armies, even police goes, even IPS officers go. IPS officers go. You have civil servants who go there and all of that to help set up the judicial system, help set up all of that stuff. So these are staff officers who build the country, rebuild the country, help in rebuilding the country. Then you have military observers. The observer's role is basically to see whether the rules that have been formulated as a peace agreement are being followed. So they'll report. Then we have the third component, which is called blue helmets. Blue helmets is actual combat troops. Now these combat troops are sent to enforce, in some cases, if it has to be enforced, the rule of the United Nations or the agreement of the two parties. So I was part of the UN blue helmets. And thankfully, Angola was not a very volatile situation. There were some, tricky moments, but not something like, say, Somalia and all that, where the UN troops were attacked. They were attacked by the rebels and the locals. But it was a great opportunity to learn from several different armies. Great opportunity, I must say, to. I think it was in Angola that I really appreciated what Mahatma Gandhi did for our country. And you might find it very weird. Because what happened in Angola was, Angolans achieved their freedom through violence. They were like ruled by the Portuguese. And I have to tell you that given a choice between being ruled by the British and the Portuguese, the British were, despite whatever they have done, was still not something comparable. At least that was my, because I saw what, Angola didn't have, there was no local language of Angola. A country which is 3/4 the size of India didn't have a local language. They had only Portuguese as their local language. They had everything had been wiped out. So a nation that achieved its freedom through violence continued to try and solve its problems through violence.
It became cultural.
I got my freedom through violence in 1975. Now there are two parties. Both the parties want to be the ruler. So they try to resolve it just like they fought the Portuguese. Now they'll fight each other. And that country had been at war for the next 20-25 years. Recently, it's sort of come down to peace. But 95, when I was there, was pretty bad. So very clearly, you realize your own culture, the strengths of your own culture, weaknesses also, when you look at it from another person's eyes. When you look at it with your own eyes, you're often not able to spot that. So you see through the eyes of the others and you admire, now I get it. Now I get the great contribution that man did to introduce an environment where we are able to protest non-violently. We're still protesting, but protesting non-violently, vis-a-vis a country which got its objective with violence, and therefore they had that solution for every problem that they had thereafter. Right. So it was a great experience in that sense.
And was that your last stint in the army?
No, it wasn't. Then I came back, and then I had another tenure in Suratgarh. That's one of our border areas in Rajasthan. And after that, I was posted as an instructor in the Armored Corps Entrance School, which is in Ahmednagar, where I was working with young officers who would then be, sort of taking their own troops into battle. And that's when I sort of exited from the army.
Yeah. So this podcast originally started with the intention of explaining your career, but I love that it turned into an army special. And I think we'll be doing a sequel episode about what happened after your time in the army. So, but I'd like to end this particular podcast by asking you about, the youth today. So a lot of people my age who are like in the mid 20s now grew up watching Laksh, and Laksh was a movie that really kind of turned people towards the army. In the modern day, I have two questions for you. The first is that what is the future of the Indian Army looking like in terms of how are we prepping for the 2020s and 30s? Is artificial intelligence going to be a part of it? Are there more advanced pieces of warfare that are like kind of finding its way into the Indian Army? And secondly, why should a young kid join the Indian Army today?
So let me answer these two questions separately. So of course, you probably would be aware, though you may not have thought of it consciously, that every technology that you use today originated from war. So whether it's laser, internet that you're using and all of that stuff, artificial intelligence, you name it, drones, drones, everything has originated from war. And there's a reason for that. Jet engines, rockets. When a nation is fighting for its existence, it's obviously going to put its best resources to try and solve that problem. Matter of fact, the number of technological innovations that happened in the Second World War, in terms of the amount that was done in that 4 years, would probably never ever have been achieved thereafter, because that compelling reason wasn't there to build a rocket right now, to find better metallurgy, to do this, to do that, all of those things. So pretty much every technology that you see has had its origins, and probably it's the government and the armed forces which actually play with it first, right? Having said that, we, by the nature of our terrain, are a very manpower intensive army. Has to be, because we've got very long and very disparate different borders. So we have jungles, we have mountains, we have deserts, we have amphibian role, we have all sorts of island locations that have to be protected, all of these. And that basically makes the army very, very manpower oriented, infantry largely oriented. Having said that, technology is coming in all of these areas. Things like artificial intelligence and all of that have a role to play in certain niche areas of the army, which is much more to do with intelligence and big data and logistics also. By the way, logistics is a very, very interesting area in the army where artificial intelligence is immensely valuable.
Logistics of everything.
In the end of the day, wars are fought on logistics alone.
मतलब यहाँ खाना कैसे पहुँचेगा, weapons कैसे?
Now I'll give you an example. Let's say that you have a garrison in Bikaner, right? Now, let's say it's an armored division. So there are tanks, and there are light tanks and artillery pieces, this, that, vehicles, hundreds and hundreds of vehicles. Now, if you have to just design the logistic chain for them, now the vehicles are not of the same vintage. They have not run the same number of kilometers. So किसी का fan belt change करना है, किसी का sprocket change करना है, किसी का ये. Each vehicle has a record, which you know that its maintenance has to be done, this has to be done, that has to be done. The troops who are posted over there, they might prefer more of wheat. Jar troops will have rations which are oriented towards grain and the rice and this and that. They're managing this entire complexity where every vehicle has got its own individual idiosyncrasies. It's not like 40 tanks are bought and given to the Pulton together. No? It's not like all 40 tanks will run the same number of kilometers. It's not like you're maintaining a fleet. You are maintaining a fleet, but each vehicle in that fleet is a completely different individual, and therefore the logistic chain has to cater for that, right? So it's a very, very complex, logistics is one of the most complex exercises in the forces, all forces of the world. And as they say that, the generals fight on strategy, but the field marshals fight on logistics, because logistics is what enables army to win or lose. I mean, we have seen that in in the Second World War, the German, Eastern Front collapsed because of logistics, not because the troops were not brave or they could not fight and all this. Basically, because the tanks did not have diesel to run. So without petrol, without fuel, it will not move forward. If your ammunition train does not reach you, you cannot fight. Food does not arrive, you will not be able to sustain troops there. So logistics is the bedrock of
Something you never think of as a civilian.
you never think of that. How do you think this ammunition arrives all the way up to Siachen?
Your vision of the army is okay, fighters, brave, intelligent, but it's mainly physical, and there's so many layers of
Of
organization.
course, so that's true in every organization. It's every organization. You see a movie, you see the hero doing that prancing around and all of that. You know the value chain behind to make that happen, starting from the makeup artist to this, that. There are so many other layers which a normal civilian does not see. They don't see. They only see the final product. So that is part one. The part two, why should a Indian youth join the army? It's a very good question. I think I've answered it in another forum slightly flippantly at that point of time, in which I gave this same concept that pretty much everything that you are going to learn in management, span of command, amount of troops under you, what is the, like I'll give you an example. There's so much of army in your life that you don't know about. I'll give you an example. In good old days, the kings would not keep a huge standing army. There was no point. We're not fighting by have a huge standing army. So they'll have a small standing army. And whenever there was a battle or a crisis or whatever, the emperor will send out, acha wo Jodhpur se itne log bhejo, Jaipur se itne. So from different subas, people would come. Or different risalas, as they were known at that point of time, subas. Or that's where the word subedar comes from. Similarly, there was no payroll system those days. So 10 people's salary would be handed over to the senior most guy and he'll be told, ye 10 logon ka hawala aapko diya jata hai. That's where the word havaldar comes from. So instead of the subedar, if the subedar could not come, he would send his deputy, the naib subedar, the sub-inspector. It all comes from there. It originates from there. So a lot of that lessons which you will learn in B schools, I think are second-hand lessons. The primary fountainhead is there. So one great opportunity is to learn that from the primary fountainhead. The second is, like I explained earlier, the camaraderie, the bonding, and that wealth that you will create over there is again a great thing to possess for life. I tell a lot of my people who listen that join it for 10 years. You have an option to join for 10 years. During that 10 years, you will be groomed from the age of, say, about 20, 25. That's usually the bracket at which people join, up to 30, 35. And you will come out into the CV street as an individual who is equipped for handling pretty much everything in life. Anything that life will throw at you, you will be able to, life will push you in the chest from a 20-floor building. You will tumble and fall on your feet because you've been trained how to do that. So that's the second reason, I would say. The third reason is what happens when a young man or a woman joins an organization, does their MBA, joins, let's say, an MNC, then in the MNC, they're in this part of the MNC, in that part of the MNC, then they move from this MNC to another MNC, and they're in the same place. Even if you change cities, what is the difference between you living here in Bombay and, say, Dadar and living in, say, Sarojini Nagar in Delhi? It's exactly the same thing. It's exactly the same. But this is a profession which will give you 2 to 3 years of change everywhere. You will go to places which you will normally never ever go to. You will see jungles that you will never ever be in. There are places in Siachen and I'm sure in many other areas where if you go on one day, if you just decide walking and say, okay, let me walk along this trail or this ravine, you could actually be setting your foot in a place where no human being has ever been there before. Now that exposure and that ability, even when you are under training, the kind of exposure you are given, ranging from horse riding, swimming, polo, shooting, flying, gliders, pretty much everything that, even millionaires can't afford it. You can't. I used to tell my friends when I was posted in Ahmednagar, there was not one, there were 2 golf courses in that really small town because it had the Armored Corps Regimental Center. So they had their golf course and mechanized. So imagine a place where there is so much of golf course that we had to officially detail students. Tu jayega aaj golf. I don't want to. No, bloody hell, you'll go. So that's the kind of resources that are available there. Yeah. And I think that part of your career, that part of your life when you're young, when you can move around, when you're okay to experiment with life, it's a great place to go. And to serve there for 10 years, come back with the knowledge of what that forces teach you. Come back with a huge family, that exists there, and that will always be family for you. I think those are the reasons why people should join. It teaches you entrepreneurship, teaches you innovation, gets you that band of brothers, psyche, all of those things. And academics. It is one of the institutions which, like so many of my course mates, became engineers after they joined the army. They came through NDA, they came through IMA, chose engineers, chose signals, and they were made into full-fledged engineers, full-fledged pilots, full-fledged missile pilots. So these are skills that are life skills. This is not only meant for your tenure in the army.
I sincerely hope that there's some kid watching this who comes to you 10 years from now and says that one podcast that he saw you on kind of convinced him to join the army, or multiple kids.
Or I hope they don't come and curse me. Yeah, I listened to you and look where it got me.
No. Like, I mean, I think that's the kind of beauty of the age that we live in. Information is this freely available, and perspectives are different. This is also, I think, I don't know whether we did it on the podcast or before the podcast, but you just told me that kids today think differently, are equipped differently.
Of course they do. Of course they do. Every generation is a completely different generation. So every generation's pace is different, speed is different, value systems are different. Everything changes. Yeah.
So the final question I have for you, again, I want to ask you this as the soldier form of you and not the corporate and not the motivational speaker. On the day that you're dying, if you had to just flash one memory of the time that you were in the army, and it could be peaceful or violent or whatever it is, but what defines that, your whole sensibility as a soldier, that if there's one memory that'll flash in front of your eyes?
Well, it's a hypothetical question. I really don't know what memory will flash at that point of time. But if I were to actually look back at that stint where I spent there, I think it's the most formative, sort of everything that I've learned in terms of the ability to communicate, the ability to lead, understanding technology. The fascinating thing about the army is that we don't have the luxury of 4 years courses. Itna time nahi udhar. So they'll have short, intense courses where they'll teach you about like sophisticated technology in a compressed time frame, and you'll be good enough to operate it and good enough to do stuff with it and all of that stuff. All of that are skills that are utilized again and again and again. They're all skills. It's not like you learn a skill of how to disassemble a rifle in say 6 seconds. You learn a skill that you can disassemble anything if you put your mind to it in about 10 to 15 seconds and reassemble it back, because you've done it with a sophisticated piece of equipment. Interestingly, I'll tell you something. When I joined my unit, it is the 22nd Battalion of the Mechanized Infantry Regiment, elite unit, crack unit. But when I joined, it was a new raising. It was a newly raised unit. And this was one of the first 3 units who were given a new equipment, which was the BMP-2. A BMP is a infantry, ICV it's called, infantry weapon. Like it's a carrier which carries people, infantry combat vehicle. So it was a new generation. And because it was a new generation, it was imported from Russia. Everything was in Russian. Everything. The controls were in Russian. The manuals were in Russian and all of that. Now, 10th class pass Jawans, they figured it out. They figured out equipment like IR, infrared, night equipment, night vision devices, this, that. They figured it out. And that gives you the confidence to say that even if it's sophisticated machinery, you allow kids to play with it. They will discover how to operate computers. They will discover how to operate YouTube. They will discover it. And you don't need to feel apprehensive. Now, this is a skill set that is good for you for the rest of your life. Rest of your life, that if I have to learn. I know this today, that if I put my passion to learning photography, maybe in about 6 months' time, I'll be about 70 to 80% as good as maybe the best, not the best, but a very proficient person, but it'll take me 6 months because I can learn it in an accelerated manner. That skill of learning accelerated learning is universal. Yes. It'll exist so your ability to transition from one dimension to another dimension, because you're able to learn it fast, because you have the confidence that I've learned sophisticated stuff in a short time before, it's like the 4-minute barrier. You know the story, right? So Roger Bannister breaks the 4-minute barrier for the 1-mile run. And within months of him breaking it, dozens of people start breaking it. Why does that happen? Because it is a construct that is artificial in the head. It's an artificial limitation. Once that limitation has been removed, people, ये कर सकता है तो मैं भी कर सकता हूँ. अगर मैं वो सीख सकता हूँ तो ये भी सीख सकता हूँ. That is a very, very important sort of thing I would think about. That pretty much anything that I achieved or whatever I am today or originated from that experience.
Yeah. While we haven't touched upon those topics in this episode, and I know that it's not your intention in life. Like after talking to you, I've come to know that you're someone who chases knowledge, who chases that next level of growth. Money is an outcome of growth. Getting financially stable is an outcome of growth, of learning more. So is it fair to say that the army equipped you as a man to be much more financially stable than you would have been if you had chosen another path earlier in life? Or rich compared to some
So
other.
again, I mean, rich is a state of mind.
Yeah.
Rich is a state of mind.
While I understand that.
And so let me put it this way. I think not just the army. And again, I want to qualify this answer. It's not true for the army. It's true for all government servants. It's true for all who exist on what many corporate counterparts would say, man, 50,000 bucks, how can you manage? It teaches you that 50,000 rupees a month is more than enough if you want to be happy about it, right? And 50 million is not enough if you're not happy about it. So all government services, I must say, they teach that the real wealth is the education of the children, the value systems that you have put in place. And matter of fact, more often than not, I've seen more wealth actually destroying things. It's an irony that I was talking about it to someone just recently, that when we were young, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, there used to be one TV in a house and people used to come from many, many different houses to come and watch the Sunday film. I still remember when we got a TV in a house in Green Park, we had some family friends who would ride in a scooter all the way from Narayana. Now, you don't know Delhi, so they are not very near each other. Of course, those days there was no traffic and all that. But it was a ritual that family would come to our house to watch that Sunday films. Not to watch the film, it's to... most of the films were crappy those days anyway. It was much more for that bonding, that lunch with dinner hoga saath mein, ye wo, phir raat ko they'll go back, this and nahi aaj idhar hi ruk jao, nahi tomorrow school, this, that and all. That bonding today, in one house, in 4 rooms, there are 4 screens. But the whole intent of having a common entertainment which you would all sit around and bond. Now, I'll explain what that means. Let's say you and I are watching a same episode. Your reaction on that will tell me what you are, right? Let's say, I'm using a controversial example deliberately. Let's say somebody watches Thappad together. And one person says, "Theek hi to hai yaar, what's the big deal in that?" You know more about that person's thinking. I'm not saying right or wrong, but you know more about that person's thinking. But if he's watching Thappad in one room, you're watching Thappad in another room, you never get that interaction. So actually, plenitude of material assets usually results in poverty of emotion.
Emotional isolation.
Whatever you want to call it. But it usually results in that. So you may own, this guy, Brad Pitt said it very well in Fight Club, that things that you own
Actually own you.
end up owning you. And I think the sooner that realization comes, it came late to me. It does come late to people. But I think it did come in time for me to take a call that, okay, that's why I left the corporate life to say that, this is it. I mean, I can continue. And I was working for one of the most fastly growing organizations in India, as you're aware.
Which is the hot topic of the next episode.
Yeah, so it was growing and there was, and I had great bosses and a great, so there was no reason to leave except to say that there is something that you need to have which will make you truly rich. And that something is enough. Enough. I think the lesson of enough. हो गया बहुत इतना बहुत है. That is a very important lesson for everybody to sort of learn. Some people learn it early, some people learn it late, some people never learn it, and they continue to chase objectives and all of that, or material wealth. Actually, it's not even. I think beyond a point, it's not even material wealth, because I'm just thinking that a CEO who makes 2 crores, if he starts making 3 crores, will his life really change? Right? Is the food he's going to eat change? The place where he's going to, is not going to change. What is happening is relatively he feels that I'm now become a bigger person than I was before because I'm being paid more. But is that true? Is that really true? If what you were doing earlier and what you're doing now is exactly this. So somebody asked me, I was 54 when I left Reliance last year. And someone asked me this, that, "Hey, come on, this," which is true, that many people, many HR, colleagues will also tell you this, that the peak earning capability of individual in a corporate is between the age of 48 to 55. That's the peak, because now you have amassed your knowledge, built your contacts, done your this thing, and this is the time when you should be actually taking a premium on that. And they asked me, why have you left at this point of time? I said, but this is the time when if I want to go on a bike ride, I can go. If I want to just say, okay, fine, I want to ride to Leh tomorrow, not now, COVID, but I can do that. So this is the time that whatever little I have got, I'll be able to spend it. If I continue working for another 10 years, let's say I amass more wealth or whatever and all, somebody else is going to spend it. It's not going to be me. So why would I not look at the time I have as the most valuable resource? This is an exercise which someone taught me actually, and it's a good thing for you to do. You should do it. All the listeners should do it also. You should buy some marbles. You can use marbles, or marbles are good. Kancha hota hai na? Like that. Get about 100 of them or 200 of them. Put them in a jar. 52 of them represent 1 year. 52 weekends in a year. Right? 10 years means 520. Every weekend, take out one and throw it away. When you see the jar reducing, is the first time you'll realize that the sand, what is the sand clock, whatever it's called, that hourglass clock. The hourglass clock sand is running out. And it's very important at your age, because you think you're going to live forever. Actually, I thought I was going to live forever when I was 27. I didn't really, there's a sense of immortality and all of that stuff. So it's very important to start understanding that the most valuable resource we are left with is the time that we have with us. Time that is left for us. And you may acquire more material, but if you are not able to, then it's only a acquisition knowledge. It's, oh yeah, I've got this also, I've got that also, but it's really not something that you are going to be, actually being able to enjoy or use. Some people are, they get their mojo by chasing it, which is fine. It's a fair point. A guy might say, my mojo is chasing. My mojo is not really, I made few crores more, but the fact that I was chasing it. I think that's a very myopic way of looking at one aspect of life, which is just the material money.
100%, sir. Now, I don't know the civilian protocol, but on behalf of the Indian youth, I'd like to salute you.
Oh, God, it's all, you oftentimes people make it sound as if the army is from an alien planet or something.
No, it comes.
I'm pretty sure, many classmates, friends who have joined the army. If you look back at them, you say, hey, normal guy.
Yeah,
all
but
normal
very few Indian Army professionals have been on podcasts which the Indian youth listen to. So I know
that's not true either. That's not true.
There isn't enough of it, which is a huge reason we started this podcast.
I think I agree with you there. I think one of the major failures, I would say, I won't call it a failure, but is the fact that the army's brand hasn't been built in the right way. It should be. It's a very testosterone-driven brand. Yeah. It's a very, machismo-driven brand. But that's not what the army is all about. I think the army affects the Indian civilian far more in aid to civil authorities, rescuing them from floods, keeping the peace, doing all of that stuff. So I think that part of the army is a part which is not really talked about much more. So I'm using the word brand in a broader sense. I'm using it in the sense that, after all, who is the client of the Indian army? It's the Indian population, right? So what we do for the Indian population, or rather what the army does for the Indian population, is something that the Indian population should be aware of. Yes, so when we see movies like Uri and all of this stuff, that's one aspect of it. That's what we are doing to keep the boundaries safe. But what the army is doing for people inside the country, every year, 50,000 Jawans who have been trained in leadership, who have been trained in handling high-end equipment, who've been trained in sophisticated machinery, they come into the CV street. Imagine the knowledge base that they come with, this pool of talent that they come with. You study telecom engineering, so I want to tell you an anecdote. All this telecom that you see, this telecom revolution that happened in India, its origin lies in army signals. It's the army signal officers who came out after retirement. And most of the CTOs, about 10, 15 years ago, even today, you'll find that their origin is in the army. They come from there and they bring that. So that's also knowledge that is coming to the nation, right? 100%. After all, you have to remember, it is the most expensive academy in India. You pay for it with your taxpayer money. So when this resource, after working for 20, 25 years, at the age of 35, most of the Jawans, when they come out, they're 35 to 40 because they join at the age of 20, they serve for 20, 25 years. So in the peak of their life, they are out in the CV street. They are a huge resource that are available. So I think we need to look at it from all those perspectives also.
Yes, sir.
Right? So if we did that, I think the armed forces would be much. I think that's one deficiency. That's one thing that has not happened in India. That the interface between the
Yet.
If that interface became much more solid, which is there in most European countries and all of that, and there is a reason for that because all European countries, even the United States and all have gone through an existential crisis during war. India has never had an existential crisis because even our most pitched battle in 1971, really south of the Deccan Plateau, there was really no, this thing. So perhaps because of that, we have always had a arm's length, which was by design also. The word cantonment comes from the fact that you contain the troops away from the, civilian population. But I think those paradigms need to change. And I'll tell you why they need to change. They need to change because 20 years ago, 30 years ago, the battles were fought between soldiers. Today, with terror and all that happening, they're fought by civilians. That's why I wrote that book, Every Man's War, because it's every man's war. Man was not, don't take it gender specific, but it is every individual's war now. Because you may not be interested in war, but war is definitely interested in you. Right? You may not be interested in terrorism, but terrorists are definitely interested in you. So you can't say, I'm not interested in you, so don't blow a bomb in my hotel. They don't care whether you're interested or not. So I think it's very important for an average Indian to know about national security, to know about the implications of national security. And like right now, what is happening in China, it's going to affect your businesses. It will affect your business. People who want to make investments in India, they'll tell, yaar, abhi ladai hone wali hai, pata nahi karen ki nahi karen. You may have a electronics embargo by China. They say, okay, we'll not. Your cameras won't run, your modems won't run, your phones won't run. So it actually has an implication on you directly. So to think that this is something happening in outer space where, koi aur kar raha hai, I think that needs to change. It needs to change quite a bit.
I hope that, even if this podcast helps like 0.00001% in getting that message out there, I'll feel like our job is done. Thank you, sir, for being
Thanks
part
a ton.
of this episode.
Thank you.
Looking forward to having you back on the podcast.
Looking forward to be back here.
Thank you, sir.
Take care. Bye-bye.